often in the process of coming together. So I have a 2.5-year-old son, and I've watched his body go from this thing I could hold in my, in my forearm to being this like squiggly thing capable of talking and asking me questions and making unreasonable requests of my time and all sorts of stuff. That process of coming from nothing into something and then slowly falling apart is the process of life. And I wanted to write about that as well as I could and as honestly as I could, and in a way that reflected the experience of the people I'd known and loved who lived with chronic illness and in many cases had died of it. And in my experience was that all of these things are a side effect of dying, and that our sort of cultural inability to acknowledge the reality and omnipresence of this falling apart represented a real sort of failure on our part to grapple with one of the most interesting parts of life. So I had that idea initially in like 2000. I was working as a student chaplain at a children's hospital, and I really wanted to write this story that was set in a children's hospital, and it starred this like super handsome hospital chaplain, kind of an alcoholic, and had a lot of troubles, but he was really cool, and all of his like bad qualities were made up for his like chiseled good looks and everything. And there were all these like hot lady doctors. Which hot lady doctor will you choose? Sort of the central question of this original manuscript. And I worked on that book in one form or another for 8 years. Just kept going back to it over and over again. I'd write it, sort of fail at writing it, and then I'd write a different book, and then I'd fail. I'd try and fail again, and then I'd write a different book, and this continued. But this was always the book I wanted to write, and in some ways The Fault in Our Stars is my first novel. This is the novel that I wanted to write first. I just didn't figure it out. I figured it out in 2009, or 2010, I guess. I had all this stuff. I'd written, 100,000, 200,000 words, which is maybe like 600 pages, but it was all crap. It was all about this, mostly about this chaplain. So I finally found a way into it through my friendship with a young woman who was a fan of our videos and a fan of my books, named Esther. Really more a fan of our videos, I have to say. I was reading Esther's diaries recently, and I always say like she was a fan of my books, but it's not really true. And Esther had cancer from the time that I knew her, and she died in August of 2010 when she was just 16. And knowing Esther and knowing her family and being friends with a lot of her friends, it pulled me out of the story. It took me out of the story, and it allowed me to center myself in this question of why are we falling apart, and why do we fall apart at different rates? So why is it that like my grandfather, who was a very nice guy, lived to be 93 years old and spent, saw all 7 continents and had this great full life, and Esther, who was also a very nice person, only lived to be 16, and for much of her life was circumscribed by this illness, by this chronic illness. And can we make sense of that world? Can we find a way to be hopeful in that world? Or are we best off just ignoring the reality? Because I think ultimately that's why we ignore this process of death that is constantly occurring inside of not just us, but in the planet itself. The planet itself is a kind of organism that is constantly, being born and falling apart and experiencing this same cycle. Do we ignore that because it is so, the reality of it, the reality of illness in children, the reality that not all lives are long lives is so unacceptable to us that we just can't even look at it? And was there a way for me to write a story that made it okay to look at? Because my experience with being friends, not just with Esther, but with the other young sick people I've known, is that it is not hard to look at them, and it is not hard to love them. It is not hard to love that reality. And that was, but you have to be brought into the place where it's okay and not scary to love and to look at the world as it is. And you know, the sentimental maudlin cancer stories that I have read when I was a young person and like make fun of a lot in this book, don't do that for me. Like, they don't take me into that place of love and respect. They take me in, they're really about the well people in the novels, not the sick ones. Because really what they're about is they're about that attempt to try to, that whole idea that like people with cancer, particularly young people with cancer, exist so that the rest of us can learn important life lessons, right? So like the rest of us can be like grateful for every day. No, that is not why sick people exist. And that dehumanizes them and depersonalizes them and makes the story not about them but about the well. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to argue that a short life can also be a full life, and can also be a good life and a rich life, and that the definition of a rich, full life is not about whether it's long, although certainly it's easier and better if it is long, but it's about different kinds of good. And so I wanted to present in Hazel and Augustus different kinds of good lives, different ways of imagining what constitutes a good life, what constitutes a heroic life. And now, you know, 9 months after the book has come out, I haven't read it, but lots of people have been very nice about it. And the main thing that I want to say is that all the time that I was writing that story, I was terrified. I was terrified that I wasn't doing justice to a story that was in many ways, you know, not mine. I was terrified that I wasn't being, that you weren't going to like it. I was terrified that people would say, oh, a book about cancer, that sounds horrible, because that's what I say when people say, oh, a book about cancer. You know, I'm not the kind of person who's like, ooh, really? Can I read a book about cancer? How lucky am I now? You know, there are a lot of people in this room who read the book very early and recommended it to their friends and to their family, and in many cases to their parents. And that means a lot to me, and that has brought, in the end, like, writing the book did not bring me the peace I was after, but living with the book today has, in many ways, brought me that sense of peace and that conviction that there are many kinds of good and full lives. So I want to thank you. And I think I'll take some questions, if that's all right. And then, yeah, I can just call on you, and you can shout. That's fine. I'm going to call on people who are standing because they're standing. They have it hard. Yes, ma'am?
I'm second shift. No, I'm second shift. Okay. You go record. Okay. Thank you.
What? Obviously, if you're about to say a spoiler, do not say it. Okay. The question is about the middle of Looking for Alaska and if it came from personal experience. I don't like to answer that question because I wish I had the copy of the book for The Fault in Our Stars so I could read to you the part about how I don't want people to look for facts inside my books. But only because, only in the interest of protecting people I know in real life who would maybe rather not be personally connected in their own lives with my work. I didn't think about that much when I was writing Looking for Alaska, which is a very autobiographical novel in many ways. I mean, the book is about a kid who memorized his last words, who goes to a boarding school in Alabama, and I memorized last words and went to a boarding school in Alabama. It's a very autobiographical book in a lot of ways, but when I was writing it, you know, on some level you never think anybody outside of your family is going to read your books, like, or at least I didn't. And I think because of that, I wasn't, at least initially, I maybe wasn't as respectful of people's privacy as I should have been. And so, yeah, I feel like I can't answer it directly because it wouldn't be respectful of the people. Yes.
Okay. How do you feel about that giraffe behind you who's staring at you?
How do I feel about the giraffe behind me who's staring at me? I guess neutral. Yes, Holden Caulfield thinks you're a phony.
You actually can use the microphone.
Oh, you can. If you want to log into the microphone, then everyone can hear you. Or
if you could change anything about The Fault in Our Stars, would you, and what would it be?
That's an interesting question because writers. So the reason I don't reread my books after they come out is because, of course, there are many insufficiencies in my work, and I'm keenly aware of them, and I don't particularly enjoy being reminded of them. So there are two kinds of like negative reviews, right? There are the negative reviews that you disagree with and that you think are stupid. Like, for instance, when people say, "I don't believe that teenagers are that smart." Well, that doesn't bother me because I think I just disagree. You know, like it's always adults who say that too. It's funny, like if you go through the Amazon reviews and you read which people said like teenagers don't actually talk like that, it's a lot of people who then go on to be like, not that I read all of the reviews of my books. Not that there's 24,000 Goodreads reviews of The Fault in Our Stars, and I've read every one of them. It's always people who are like, I mean, I'm in my 20s and I don't talk like that. And I'm like, well, that's not my fault. I shouldn't be held accountable for your failure to like grapple with the interesting questions of the human species. But yeah, of course, there are lots of things that I would change in The Fault in Our Stars, but there are things that I don't know how to change, or I would have changed them. You know, there are lots of places. Look, all I can see when I read one of my books is the things that don't work, or the things that I think will make readers stop for a second, or the things that I think will make them conscious that the book is written and not like a story that's alive in their minds. You know, and all that stuff is difficult. And if I tortured myself with it, you know, as I could for the next, you know, however many years, I would never write another book. I would just sit around and try to rewrite The Fault in Our Stars over and over and over again. And in the end, like, I had to give you guys the book, and I did the best I could, and I had to trust that that you'll read it generously. I think like the relationship between reader and writer ultimately is one of kind of mutual generosity, and it's me giving you a gift and you giving me a gift back. And the gift that I give you is that I try very hard to write the best thing I can possibly make. And then you give me sort of two gifts. One is money, which I appreciate. I mean, even if you get the book out of the library, on some level, you know, somebody paid for that book. And I encourage you to get the book out of the library. But the reason libraries work so well and that they encourage, they encourage our entire, you know, civic well-being is because there is some level of financial connection between the reader and the library, which is why it's very different. I'm asked this all the time. Why I could check your book out of the library, but instead I just stole it on the internet. Why is that different? And I'm like, well, because I control the means of distribution and I don't want you to steal it. So it stops there, really. But there are lots of other reasons too. So we can talk about that if anyone's interested. But so in my opinion, like there's that gift, obviously. That's sort of the obvious gift. The bigger and more important gift is the gift of your attention and your generous reading. Like there are lots of ways to read a novel, and we've all had this experience of going into a novel and being like, I'm going to hate this, and then hating it, and then being like, I did it. I hate it. In fact, I think a lot of people like who read the sort of like whatever the big phenomenon book of the time is, whether it's 50 Shades of Grey or Twilight or whatever, you go into that book reading it, frankly, with a lack of generosity, and like maybe it was also written with a lack of generosity, or maybe it wasn't. But like our responsibility as readers is to try to give the stories the best chance that we can give them, the best life that we can give them, because each story is going to be different for each reader. Yes. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Once you have an idea for a story, how do you take it from there? What's your next step?
How do I go from an idea to like a book? How much time do you have? I'm obviously not very good at it because I only publish a book like every 3 or 4 years. I don't get big ideas, to be honest with you. I've never had a big idea. I've never had an idea like wizard school. I want that idea, like I'm ready for it, but I haven't had it yet. I have little ideas like, why do we suffer? or what if my friend John had been a girl? That was sort of the initial idea for Paper Towns. So I was thinking a lot about my friend John Malden, and I was like, man, if John Malden had been a girl, he would have been much more interesting. He would have had a whole different set of problems, and he would have had this sort of all these gender expectations, and it would have been really cool and interesting. So, I mean, that's how Paper Towns began for me. Looking for Alaska began for me by thinking about my own high school experiences, I think, and wanting to process them. But as for how you go from those little ideas to the business of actually writing a book, like, to me, it's more about the interconnection of very small ideas, linking them together into a chain. There's a lot of ways to imagine shapes of novels, so one of the first ways I imagine a book is usually as a spiral. Like there's this point for Hazel in The Fault in Our Stars. The point is Hazel has to go to a support group, and this point leads to another point. Hazel meets Augustus, which leads to another point, which leads to this ever-widening circle until, whoa, they have this crazy life together, and whoa, they're in love, and whoa, this happens, and like it spirals out from that point. So if you think about the novel or your story as a spiral, then you can sort of think about what should happen in order for it to keep that shape. And I find that quite useful. This is very abstract, and I apologize to people who aren't interested in writing, but there are lots of other ways to imagine shapes of stories too. So in Will Grayson, which I wrote with my friend David Levithan, we imagined the novel as an X. Don't cheer for David. David's new book, by the way, I have to say, I never promote the work of other authors because it's very bad for me. But I do. But David's new book is just beautiful. It's just really brilliant. It's called Every Day, and it's about a kid who wakes up every day in someone else's body. Every day a different body, and in love with the same girl. So every day, this person who doesn't have a gender or a physical body of any kind wakes up in a new body within about 4 hours drive of wherever he or she woke up yesterday, and he's all, or she, I'm trying, as we do, I'm trying to gender binary it when it is a brilliant novel that does not allow for that. This individual wakes up every day in a different body and then like has to try to get to this girl this individual loves. We really need a gender neutral pronoun. That's very hard to say say in sign language. No, gender neutral pronouns, isn't it? Yeah. Well, they've solved this problem to a great extent, where we haven't. So, yeah, but it's a really fascinating book, and it's one of those books that has a brilliant premise, but that's also really brilliantly executed. But anyway, in Will Grayson, we imagine the novel as an X. These two characters start out in very different places, they come together, their lives sort of intertwine, and then they go their separate ways. And in imagining that novel as an X, that also sort of fuels where your ideas go, because you think like, well, I have to put them one step closer to each other, or I have to put them one step further away from each other. And so that was very helpful. So imagining these things as shapes and as like sort of forms, not to get all like contemporary art theory on you, but like thinking about the importance of forms and the centrality of the form of the novel is very helpful to me. Pizza John. It's always an advantage if you're wearing my face on your torso.
Okay, so in one of your novels you wrote that imagining the future is a kind of nostalgia. How often do you find yourself divulging into that nostalgia in your writing and in your personal life?
So I said imagining the future is a kind of nostalgia. How often do I find myself indulging that in my writing and in my personal life? I didn't write that line, my wife wrote it. We were on our first date. It's a funny story, I'll tell the story, if that's okay. So, I really liked her. I went to high school with Sarah, but we did not know each other in high school at all. She was a couple years behind me, and we ran in very different circles. And, but we met again in Chicago, and she was this like really talented artist, and she was managing a really cool contemporary art gallery, and she's fascinating, really intelligent. We had brunch. I was really impressed with her. I heard that she was not dating anyone, and so I did my due diligence and everything. And then so I emailed like 7 of my friends, and I said, "Do you want to see the movie Lost in Translation tonight?" And I CC'd Sarah. And then I emailed my other 6 friends, and I said, "Not you." Turns out is a terrible strategy. Never start a relationship on a lie. And indeed, she broke up with me after a few dates because I was so like performed like that, you know, because I was so like I was trying so hard, and I was so far removed from like whatever authentic self I might have somewhere inside of me that she wasn't, you know, that interested. So yes. So that did not work out. However, we then got back together and got married, and now we have a kid and everything's fine.
I know.
So, she said that to me on our first date though, because before Lost in Translation we went to this bagel deli, and she said, I was talking about high school and how I imagined my life. We were talking about high school, and I said I was always imagining my life after high school and thinking about what adulthood would be like, and how like you can't indulge that impulse if you write the kind of novels that I write. And she said imagining the future is a kind of nostalgia, and I was like, I try not to indulge it at all in my novels. I try not to take my novels anywhere past the present. I try not to like send my characters to tell you what like. I don't want to prescribe that for you. I don't want to give you an order about where my characters end up or where the story ends up or anything like that, because I want that to be yours, not mine. So it's very important to me. Hey there. Digital mobile. Oh yeah. Right, so lots of people ask me, like, what happens after the end of The Fault in Our Stars, or what happens after the end of Looking for Alaska? But to do that would be to imagine the future, which is a kind of nostalgia, like, right? Like, these characters aren't writing it from the future, they aren't telling their stories from the future, they're telling their stories from the present. And they're like, to take them far into the future, into adulthood or whatever, to me would just be that sort of reverse nostalgia. Oh, jeez. Yes, with the scarf. The more you scream, the less likely I am to call on you. I have to tell, I'm sorry, but it's true. Because then I get nervous that you're going to just ask me who the F is Hank or something that like makes no sense to anyone in the audience. Yes. Hi. Yeah.
What is the limit that you set between your own story and someone else's?
Where do I set the limit between my own story and someone else's? That's a really interesting question. I mean, from a postmodernist perspective, like I tend to agree that the author is dead and that the author is irrelevant, or to the extent that the author is a character in a novel, the author is the least important and genuinely least interesting character in the novel, and should be ignored whenever possible. Like a truly successful book is a book in which you are not frequently conscious of the author. I don't want you to be reading The Fault in Our Stars and to be thinking about my biography, and I don't particularly want you to be reading Shakespeare and thinking about his biography. I think most of what's interesting about Hamlet, or even, I mean, The Tempest is a better example, because in The Tempest, it's supposed to be Shakespeare's last play, and Prospero throws his wizarding books into the ocean and gives it all up, and yada, yada, yada. And like, this is always read from certain, you know, sort of new more recent literary critical readings as Shakespeare throwing in his own tools of magic that he used to transform the Elizabethan stage, and yeah, whatever, like that's fine. I just don't think it's that interesting, right? Like maybe that tells us something about Shakespeare, and like I'm sure that Shakespeare liked putting in little jokes that pleased him about his own life into his novels, as do, or into his plays, as do I, as do most writers, because it's a pretty self-indulgent trade. But I don't think it's what's interesting about The Tempest. Like, to me, everything that's interesting about The Tempest is this weird idea of savageness and the weird relationship between the civilized and the savage. And, like, that's interesting. I'm not interested that, like, Shakespeare was quitting. Yeah, I feel, I mean, you know, like, it's just not the biggest thing in the book for me, or in the story, or I guess I should say in the story. So, I want the same to be true in my work, but it's completely impossible because I have put so much of my life on the internet. And so many of you know so much about me that there is no way to separate it out, right? And like, we live in this personality-driven culture, particularly personality-driven literary culture, and there's nothing I can do about that. But I also happen to really like making stuff with you on the internet, and books are great, but they are not a good way to make stuff. Like, books are a terrible way to raise money for charity, and books are a terrible way to like work together to do all the projects that we've done in our online community. And so I want to do that stuff. So I have these contradictory desires, right? Here on the first page of the book, I say, don't think about anything that might be related to me in this book, or anything in my life. Just don't think about it. Just read the novel as a novel. I'm ordering you to do this. And then I'm like, hey everybody, it's me, John Green. You know, like, look at the sandwich I had for lunch. That's a completely unfair thing to ask of my readers, to both look at my sandwiches and to like disconnect me from the novel. All of which is to say that I have absolutely no idea how to answer your question, because I do not have a solution to this problem. I am conscious of the problem. I spend like, it keeps me up at night. I worry about it. I just don't know how to solve it. Like I first became conscious of this in 2008 when our community was much, much smaller. But all these people would email me and they would say, I read Paper Towns in your voice. Like they would hear my voice reading it to them. And when I read a book written by a friend, like when I read a Maureen Johnson novel or I read a David Levithan novel, I often hear their voices when I'm reading. Like I actually hear them as if they were reading it to me. And they're, you know, Maureen's like weird little... Hi, Maureen. And I don't want that. You know, I don't want you to read my story that way. But I also know that there's no way around it if we're also going to do all of this fun, interesting stuff together that we can do. And furthermore, to be completely frank with you, before I told people about my, like I showed pictures of my sandwiches, my readings were not this well attended. So there's that to consider as well. It's a very interesting question that I don't have a solution to. Yes?
Good question.
Yes.
What do you mean by the universe wants to be released?
What book am I reading right now? I'm reading, I can't even remember the title of it, but it's very long. But it's D.T. Max, is that his name? D.T. Max's biography of David Foster Wallace. one of my favorite writers. Does anyone remember what it's called? No? Okay. Someone knows what it's called? Just shout. Okay, well, whatever. It's good. So far. I'm like 40 pages in. It could get worse. Yes. I like your shirt.
This is the pizza shirt.
Oh, is it working? Oh, I actually have one for you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, sure.
Woo!
Thank you for guessing the right size. It's a large. Yeah, sure.
So I went back and I was watching some of your older videos that weren't on the Vlogmothers channel. There's one of like I don't know what they were, but there's one where you went urban exploring.
Oh yeah.
And I was wondering if that was something that inspired
Paper Towns.
Yes.
Probably. I was guessing, but yeah. So I went to one time I was in Detroit with M.T. Anderson, who's like probably the greatest American young adult fiction writer. He said resentfully. He's the best though. He's a true genius. Like, it's very rare in your life that you meet a true genius, and he really is. I mean, if you read The Astonishing Life of Octavian Nothing, Traitor to the Nation, it is an actual work of genius, which is a very strange thing to come across. And then it's even stranger to meet the creator of this work and to have him be, you know, mostly normal. But anyway, he's not that normal. And I guess he was going to Detroit, and he had heard that it was possible to break into all these abandoned buildings. And so he like walked up to the post office, which is has been abandoned for like 40 years. And he was like walking around the circumference trying to find a way over the fence, and he saw this little like head pop up. And he was like, "Hey, you!" And this like 16-year-old kid comes out, and Tobin, that's what he calls himself, not M.T. Anderson. Tobin said, "Can you get me in?" And the kid said, "For $40. And then like he had this crazy experience exploring the ruins of Detroit with this kid. Then he comes to Kalamazoo, where we're speaking together, we speak together, and then we drive back to Detroit to take an airplane home, whereupon there is some massive snowstorm on the East Coast, and we can't get home for 4 days. So I ended up going urban exploring with Tobin and this 15-year-old kid, who charged me as well. And he was amazing. I mean, he was like this savant of Detroit architecture who also happened to have just massive courage, which I don't have. So I'm a very anxious person, and I really struggle with my anxiety problems. And so being in large, long, abandoned spaces was very nervous for me. Which made me think about Quentin. I'd already written some of the urban exploring sections in Paper Towns, but being in those places definitely affected it. Definitely like reshaped my feelings about that, what it's like. Yes.
Okay, I'm older than a lot of the people here, and I know you said that you like to write for young people because old people aren't as interesting, which is true. But as a former English teacher and a current high school librarian, I'm a big pusher of you, and I just wanted to tell you that I think you're great, and I push you a lot. I'm your street pusher. So thank you for what you do. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. You are not alone at all in your oldness. You'll be here about 23, so. Oh, wow. Wow.
I'm not stalking you, and I don't know your mother sells soap.
Mom does sell goat soap from her goat farm in western North Carolina. Farmer Jane soap. I'm not afraid to plug her. Yeah. There are a lot of us, adults, who read young adult fiction and like it, and who've read The Fault in Our Stars and liked it. We aren't as loud. We tend not to make as much noise. But in fact, like, most of the readers of The Fault in Our Stars now, like the new readers, are adults. That's been a very odd transition for me to get emails from 82-year-old grandmothers about my book or whatever. They're very nice usually. But it's an interesting transition for me because I am used to both having and preferring young adult readers. Now I have to slightly recalibrate my message, I guess, to pretend that I do like adults. So, yes, you are my favorite. I think we have time for perhaps one more question. I apologize to all the people whose questions I won't be asking. But yes, you, sir.
What's your puff level today?
Mr. Green, Mr. Green! The crash course that you and Hank are doing.
Thank you.
Are there plans to continue it, and in what fashion
Sure.
after your weeks are up?
So my brother and I are teaching, we have this show that's funded by Google called Crash Course that teaches, I teach AP level world history, my brother teaches AP level biology in a series of videos that are about yeah, it's very, very expensive, man, to be honest with you. It's not something that will ever earn money on an advertising rep model because it just costs. Educators are expensive, curriculum advisors are expensive, editors and animators are expensive, and it's a very big undertaking. I don't know that we'll have Google support again, in which case we will have to figure out what we want to do. We would love to keep doing it. I've never been so passionate about anything. I've never had as much fun making stuff, so hopefully we'll find a way to do it. This is truly the last question.
Hi, I'm a big fan of your books.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, so many of them are about teenagers and about this awkward stage of life where you're trying to figure out how to make friends and what to do with your life and what high school to go to and what career to pick. What advice would you have for young people?
What advice do I have for young people about going through all that stuff? I mean, the great poet Robert Frost once said, "The only way out is through." People will tell you that this is supposed to be the best years of your life or whatever, but that's a dirty, dirty lie. It's an evil, vicious lie. Adulthood is wonderful. There is a stability to adulthood that may seem lame and boring to you when you're a teenager, but oh gosh, is it nice. To not have to wonder, who am I going to make out with next week? It's that same person it's been for many years. That's nice. To have the background, to know what it's like to have been in love, to know what it's like to experience loss, to be able to contextualize these feelings that are always welling up inside of us. I mean, adulthood doesn't stop being exciting by any stretch of the imagination, but you're able to contextualize the excitement a little bit better, which makes it much easier to survive. So my advice to you would be I guess I would say two things. First off, do listen to adults that you trust in your life. They know something. It's hard to do sometimes because you want, because sometimes they're wrong and sometimes they give you advice that's also not just the exact opposite of what you want to hear. And it's difficult to do things you don't want to do. It's difficult to do things that just sort of seem wrong, even if you know in the broadest sense that they're right. So I would encourage you to find adults that you trust and listen to them. The most important thing to me is to understand that this will end in both the best ways and the worst ways. Things will go on, and you will go on, and you, as I think Augustus says to Isaac, in the middle of The Fault in Our Stars, you are going to have a big and wonderful life and do all kinds of wonderful things that you can't possibly imagine now. And so, trust in that. Thank you.